Good evening, and welcome to tonight's Guardian Live event in partnership with the UNA UK. Please give a very warm welcome to UNA UK's Executive Director, Nathalie Samarasinha.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, my lords, ladies, and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to the first ever public debate with candidates for UN Secretary-General to be held in this country. It's a real pleasure to welcome you today on behalf of UNA UK, our partners The Guardian and the Future UN Development System project at the City University New York Graduate Center, and on behalf of our generous sponsor, the Royal Danish Embassy in London. The appointment of a new Secretary-General comes at a time of great global uncertainty. The convergence of crises in recent years has made clear the need for global action. But across the world, governments have been reluctant to respond, turning inwards to their domestic constituencies and pursuing narrow national agendas. Many states have focused too much on responding to extremist threats and too little on tackling root causes. Many have downgraded their international obligations, including crucial human rights protections. Those fleeing war and persecution have encountered a similar response, as governments shy away from their responsibilities under the Refugee Convention. And there's a growing disconnect between people, governments, and institutions. I think it's fair to say that public trust in financial systems and in political leadership is at a low ebb indeed. All of this has weakened the international system and the UN, and the system that we've built over the past 70 years. It will not survive unless we put our energy into making it work better for us all. And this is why a transparent and merit-based selection process for the next UN Secretary-General is so important. The UN is needed more than ever. The challenges we face, climate change, conflict, pandemics, displacement, they require global solutions. But the UN is overstretched and underfunded. For many people, it is a distant organization, opaque, outdated, and paralyzed by power politics. What we need is a highly qualified, effective, and visionary leader. Someone who can work with the big powers, that's vital, but also someone who will represent the voice, the needs, and the hopes of the world's 7 billion people. That was the starting point for the One for 7 Billion campaign, which UNA UK co-founded 2 years ago. And by the way, if you're not familiar with UNA UK, forgive this quick plug, do check us out at una.org.uk. We're the only British charity devoted to making the case for the UN and to making the UN work better. When we founded our campaign, this sort of event was quite simply unimaginable. For 70 years, the appointment of the Secretary-General has been shrouded in secrecy. Often, we weren't even sure who was in the race. The selection process for the Pope was more transparent. The Security Council rarely deigned to give us anything resembling smoke signals. And we thought this was simply unacceptable. How could this important decision be taken behind closed doors, subject to all sorts of backroom deals, by the 5 permanent members of the Security Council who don't, let's be honest, always have the best interests of the UN at heart, and who have traditionally been much more concerned with finding someone who won't upset them than with finding the best person for the job. So we are delighted that we now have, for the first time in the UN's history, a public list of those standing for the job, a sense of their vision for the UN, and opportunities for all states to engage with them. But we are campaigners. We're always going to want more and to make the process more robust. That's why we're calling for the next Secretary-General to be appointed just for a single term of office. What is the point of selecting a really great person for the role if they're then stifled at every turn by the politics of seeking reappointment. And that's why we're hosting this event today. We want to give people, not just diplomats in New York, a chance to get to know the candidates. And we're thrilled to have with us today 3 individuals who think they've got what it takes to lead the UN. This event is part of a series of debates. We had the first in New York a couple of months ago, and we're planning a further one soon. But it was really important for us to hold an event outside New York and in this country. The UK has been a strong supporter of our campaign to open up the process. Without support from inside the Security Council, I really doubt we would have got this far. And London is, of course, a global city, home to the world. I myself am very proud to be an immigrant. I am one of those evil economic migrants that we keep hearing about, and who, of course, contribute so much, I think, to the life of this city, and who have great affection for this country. In fact, at the previous event we held in New York, I think I made a very smug remark about the quality of British political debate in comparison to the tone of the Republican primaries. The tone, of course, was frequently inflammatory and sometimes facile. But that was, of course, before the EU referendum debate really got going in this country, and before the London mayoral election. I think I can only say I really hope that none of our panelists this evening will feel compelled to mention a certain German dictator. Hasn't worked so well for other people in the past. So I think we're going to do better this evening. We're going to get into the big issues that the UN needs to address. And I think we will definitely do better because all of tonight's questions come from the public, from the 200 million people who support the 1 for 7 billion campaign, from a survey conducted by our partners, Global Citizen and Avaaz, which reached people in 161 countries, and of course from all of you. We were inundated by your question submissions ahead of this event. We'll try to take as many as we can from the floor. And of course from Twitter. So please do keep the conversation going online using the hashtag SGDebate. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please join me in welcoming to the stage your moderator, The Guardian's Mark Rice-Oxley, and of course the distinguished candidates vying for the world's most impossible job. Thank you.
Yes, Antonio. Well, what a great audience. Thanks very much for coming. Thank you, Natalie, for that introduction. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. You might be thinking that in a year in which there's been such speculation and anticipation of the possibility of having the first female UN Secretary General, why are you staring at 4 men in suits? Well, I could answer that by saying never work with children, animals, or candidates for high office. But I won't. I think, in fairness, this has been an unprecedented process. All the candidates have been extremely busy trying to deal with and treat with the stakeholders and decision makers in this process. And that has naturally meant for some pretty hectic schedules. But I'm delighted that we've been joined by 3 serious and credible candidates who this evening are going to share with us something of their vision, their candidacy, and their view of a world which awaits the 9th UN Secretary General. So I'm going to introduce them now. To my immediate right, from Portugal, the former Prime Minister and until recently the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Antonio Guterres. To his right, from Serbia, former Foreign Minister and also the one-time President of the United Nations General Assembly, Vuk Jeremic. And on the far right, from Montenegro, the...
Not far right.
To his right, from Montenegro, the former Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, Igor Lukšić. Now, here's how we're going to do this. It's not going to be like the General Assembly, don't worry. I'm going to lob you a nice, easy opener that you'll enjoy. And then after that, we'll quicken things up. We'll take in some comments, some questions from the audience, and we'll have a look at Twitter too and see what's coming in there. Please feel free to tweet. I think there's a hashtag up there somewhere if you hear any words of wisdom, which I'm sure you're going to. Now, Antonio, let's start with you. Quite simply, what do you think makes you the best candidate in this process?
Well, I have no idea if I'm the best candidate, because I have a lot of respect for all the other candidates. I think I am prepared to do the job because of the experiences I had, and especially I'm totally committed because of what I felt as High Commissioner for Refugees during 10 years. You can't imagine what it is to be at the service of the most vulnerable of the vulnerable, to see levels of suffering that are absolutely unimaginable, and to feel the frustration that there is no humanitarian solution for their plight. The solution is political. The solution is to address the root causes of conflict and the root causes of all the other problems that we are facing in today's world. And this idea that the best place to do it is at the center of the UN system, and that is the reason that motivates me to be a candidate. Whether I am or not the best one, this is for the member states to decide.
Okay. Thanks very much. We'll come back to that in a minute. Now, Vuk, what will you do for real people? I mean, there are power brokers and there are the P5, but what will you do for the ordinary constituent out there in the world?
Well, first of all, I want to thank the organizers for putting together this spectacular event, and for all of you for appearing in such large numbers. It's a real privilege to be here, and thank you, Mr. Moderator, for asking this question right at the onset, because I believe that is the most fundamental question of all. I believe that public service at any level has to be about, first and foremost, about delivering to real people. And if the UN is not capable of delivering to the real people globally, then I think we have a real problem. Now, we have here in the audience many hundreds, if not thousands, of real people. So I want to ask you a question by a show of hands. How many of you believe that the UN is delivering the way it should be delivering at this very moment? Well, I see very few hands up in the air, and actually that is the sentiment that is shared widely around the world at this moment. That has to change, and that is the reason why I decided to run for Secretary General. Don't get me wrong, UN has made some historic achievements over the past decades, and UN has done some great things. But the world of today is changing at a much higher pace than the UN itself, and the new Secretary General will have to do something about it. And just tinkering a little bit with the organization is not going to do the job. I'm not aspiring to be able to give the answers to all the questions. I don't think that anybody can. But to that end, I have put together a very detailed public policy platform that I made publicly available. It's there. It contains 53 concrete commitments that I intend to carry out from day one if I get elected Secretary General. I believe that transparency and accountability requires that the governments of the world and the peoples of the world know in advance what exactly the Secretary General intends to do for the real people in the fields of sustainable development, climate change, peace operations, human rights and humanitarian relief, and the reform of the organization itself. These are the 5 clusters that I put forward publicly and transparently in my platform. I invite you all to take a look at it, and also invite you to think about what kind of leadership we need for the UN in the 21st century.
Thanks, Raymond. Thanks very much, Vuk, and there are some interesting ideas in the document that we'll sure to come back to a little later on. Igor, what's your big vision for the Secretary Generalship? What would be your big idea in office?
Well, first of all, let me also thank for organizing this event. It's really a great pleasure to be here tonight with my distinguished colleagues. I attended also New York's debate, and it was really great fun. So I was really looking forward to this one as well. And I think this is a great way to approach this process, to make it public, to make it debatable, to make it really as vivid as it can be. And I think this time deserves such approach, and time deserves, which we live in, it deserves different approaches to the way UN operates, the way UN delivers. And when you ask about the vision, I think it's a lot about optimism. I started my vision statement by saying that it's probably the best time in history a human being can be born. But is it really the sentiment right now globally? I mean, a lot of research support that. I mean, look at medical treatment, look at IT development, look at many other things. But does the youth worldwide really feel that way? Do they really have enough of opportunities? Even back 40 years ago, back in the 70s, there was the youth theory developed. It's called bulge theory. It tells that growth in population which brings many young people actually can be seen as a huge potential for demographic dividend, but it can also be seen as a great danger if those young people will not see enough windows of opportunities. So is it this the time in which we live where we have lack of such opportunities? And Nathalie came just before us and opened this great event, and she also speaks on behalf of 1 for 7 billion. But next time we select UN Secretary General, it will be 1 for 8 billion. When UN reaches 150 years, it will be 1 for 11 billion. And it was set up, it was 1 for 2 billion. So whole the world changes, and we need to be able to modify and adjust. So I think that, if you ask me, the key word in my vision, it is about optimism. Let's work to bring back optimism.
Thanks very much for that. This is a kind of strange election where you're trying to appeal to the leaders of the great powers and also trying to appeal to the wider public. Now, Vuk, you've published an 80-page report. Antonio and Igor, you've chosen to write something quite a lot shorter. Are you jealous of Vuk's of his dossier, of his?
No, I'm not jealous at all. I think all contributions are extremely positive. No one has the full truth, and we need to combine a lot of efforts in order to make sure that we are able to change the world in the good direction. I mean, it is very clear for me that today there is a basic mistrust in the general public. First of all, about the political establishments of their own countries, and second, about international organizations, be it the EU or the UN. I mean, the UN is perceived to be paralyzed in many situations, and also fragmented in the way it responds to the problems of our time. It is very clear for me that what Kofi Annan was able to express in 2005 in his fantastic document called In Larger Freedom, the absolute need that we have to have a combined approach to the problems of peace and security, to the problems of sustainable and inclusive development, and to the human rights dimension. Until now, all these things have been dealt with in a fragmented way. Now it's time to be able to connect the dots, to understand that everything is interconnected in our world, that is smaller and smaller. And to do that, we need to be able to use all experiences, all capacities, all contributions. And the Secretary General is more than a leader that pushes everybody, is a convener, is someone that is able to act like a catalyst, act like a broker, an honest broker. And so I would say that if I will be elected Secretary General, my main concern will be to be able to bring together member states, to bring together those that are today the UN, and to link them with the civil society, with the general public, and to try to have a common approach to deal with these dramatic challenges that we face today, and that can only be dealt with a much more effective UN. So all the contributions that come will be very much welcome, And I think we need to overcome the paralysis in which the UN has been from a political perspective in many key issues, be it Syria or many others. And at the same time, we will need to be able to bring together the different components of the UN system in order to address simultaneously the questions of peace and security, the questions of sustainable development, and the need to effectively promote human rights.
Perhaps one last point on this strange election campaign. You have to appeal to lots of different nations, particularly the P5, in order to get the job. So what does President Putin think of you, Igor? Do you know? Or how do you appeal to the Russians?
I'm sure he has no reason not to think I'm a good guy.
Right. Have you ever met him?
I haven't met him, so this is not firsthand. I mean, it is true, and it's a complex process, and we need to appeal to many important factors, many important and powerful players, stakeholders. But it is also great to be able to reach out and engage with by the public, which goes beyond General Assembly, Security Council, and so on. It really matters because again, this is like no time before. I mean, probably everybody before us and everybody after us will be saying more or less the same thing. It's time like never before. But it really is. I think that when we look at the world, when we look at the international context, it's somehow boiling many places. There are a lot of hotspots. When you look at the fact that 15 years ago there was 30 or so thousand of peacekeepers, now there's over 100,000 peacekeepers. When you know that budget of the UN has grown from 2.5 billion to 5.5 billion, I'm only referring to the core budget. I mean, it also tells the story about how many difficulties we are faced with, not to mention migrants crisis, refugees, but also there are some positive things. So are we able to manage the change? And that is why I believe it is very right that also UN should put focus on development. And I think it was really great effort by the current Secretary General and his team to be able to work out with the member states, the Sustainable Development Agenda, the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, also Climate Accord, and many other important documents, because I think our work will be easier because vast agenda has been set forward. Now it is on us to deliver and to get best possible organization, to mobilize collective wisdom. And that's why I appreciate the efforts like WUX. And I've done also platform, Antonio does his work. I think by showing this, by being able to share this, we will be actually able to mobilize collective wisdom. That's what we need, and that's what currently we're desperately needs.
And Vuk, perhaps a quick word. I know you've been to sort of 10 countries in the last 2 weeks, and you barely know whether you're in sort of Malaysia or Morocco. What kind of a reception are you getting?
Well, everybody's pretty interested in hearing the views, especially those who are in the Security Council, because despite the fact that some great strides were made in this election, and I want to commend the President of the General Assembly for making this historic hearing in the General Assembly where all the candidates actually had a chance to present to the whole world, making sure that to begin with you know who the candidates are and to be able to ask questions to the candidates. But in the end of the day now, this is moving to the Security Council. And I hope that this whole process and the fact that we're talking like this and the fact that we're producing ideas and platforms and putting things in writing are going to compel the next Secretary General who is going to succeed Igor or myself or Antonio or anybody else who's in this race will actually find it imperative to put forward the ideas the way I decided to put forward the ideas. Depends really on where you go. If you're in Asia or in Africa or in Latin America or you are in the P5. But I think that the diversity of the problems and views that you encounter when talking to these people reflects this great complexity of the moment that we live in. The world is definitely in flux. It is changing, and it's not going to be the way that our forefathers had when they were founding the UN. It's going to be very different by the end of the term of the next Secretary General. And I think that the next Secretary General is going to have a very important role to play as a balancing act in this ongoing transformation.
I'm just going to pause there because I'd like to go out to the audience. I believe we have our first audience question tonight from Sir Jeremy Greenstock, who's the former UK ambassador to the United Nations and currently the chair of the UNA UK. Are you there?
Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us. I want to ask a question that affects global peace in the future about the divisions, the potential for divisions between the great powers. A Secretary-General has to work with the P5, with other big powers, but he's also got to hold them to account if they start straying into competition that could lead to conflict, if they don't live up to the norms of the United Nations. And in this campaign, we're beginning to create a global public that actually really cares about these things and gives the Secretary-General some moral authority. But we need to know that the next appointee is going to be tough enough to stand up to the big powers when they go astray and yet work with them when they want to be collective. How are you going to do that?
Antonio.
Well, I think that we live in a moment in which there is a basic lack of trust among the key players in the international system. And power relations became less clear. So what I believe is the most important part of the role of the Secretary-General in this regard is to be able to be a convener, to be able to sit together with all the relevant parties and to make them understand that we are facing challenges that are so dramatic with all the conflicts that we see interlinked with each other, with their links with global terrorism, that today their contradictions and their differences are much less important than their basic common interests. And their basic common interest is peace. If you look at Syria, Syria became a nightmare for all of us. It became a disaster for the region. It is linked to all the fighters that have been gone to Syria from all over. It is a threat to our security everywhere. Here, in London, in my hometown, everywhere. So it is clear that even if the P5 and other key actors in the region, even if they have differences, they have different perspectives, different opinions, different interests, the common interest of reestablishing peace is now vital for all of us. And I believe one of the roles of the Secretary-General, as I said, is to be an honest broker, to be a convener, to have the humility to be able to work with all and to try to reestablish as much as possible the trust without which our world will not be able to address the dramatic problems we are facing.
But with respect, hasn't the current Secretary-General done or tried to do exactly that?
Well, I believe so, but you know, times are changing, and things are getting more and more complex and more challenging for the international community. If one looks, for instance, at how global terror has spread and the tragic events that have recently occurred in different parts of the world, I think that the big powers and other powers that are relevant in all these contexts that I mentioned are getting more and more aware of the basic need to reestablish peace. And if you see the efforts that are being made now, led by the US and the Russian Federation on Syria in relation to the peace process, it is clear for me that people are waking up for this basic need to come together. Now, unfortunately, there are many sources of mistrust. Unfortunately, there are many difficulties coming from the past, many different interpretations about what has happened in the last few decades. As you know, it is always possible to agree about the future. It's always very difficult to agree about the past. But I think one of the things the Secretary-General needs to be is the kind of honest broker that is necessary, because there is a vital interest for us that the world works together and addresses these challenges that are indeed having a dramatic impact in all our lives. I think that if there is something that for me is worrying when I see people around the world, is the basic insecure they are feeling. Insecure about physical situations and the question of terrorism and others, but insecure about jobs, about safety nets, insecurity about the future of the planet in relation to climate change and other aspects. And so we need to address this basic insecure, and that requires, in my opinion, the capacity for the world to unite with two different components. Values. There is an enormous lack for values to be stressed again, and especially the universal values that are in the Charter of the United Nations, and clear strategies that are able to address globally the complex challenges we are facing today.
Okay, let me come to Vuk. Do you agree with most of that, or do you see yourself as being a slightly tougher Secretary-General?
Well, I think I can agree with everything that Antonio said, but I want to directly answer Sir Jeremy's question. We do live in a complex moment, and there are growing geopolitical frictions. We can talk about them later, but there were times in the past where Secretary Generals did face perhaps even tougher conditions. Dag Hammarskjöld and U Thant in the 50s and the 60s, and things were moving in the UN. Those Secretary Generals did manage to make certain breakthroughs, especially when it comes to peacekeeping and other matters. So the next Secretary General will have to be able to navigate these difficult geopolitical currents, and at the same time be operationally innovative, diplomatically astute, to engage with them, to do what he or she can in this regard, but also to use the fact that he or she will have a very powerful loudspeaker. And I believe that the next Secretary General should not shy away from using this loudspeaker, should be a person with a spine, a person who would use this courage wisely, but be able to serve as a bridge builder, somebody who understands where the big powers come from and where are the strategic interests that are at stake and sometimes confronted, and should not shy away from trying to serve as a bridge. There is a school of thinking that the Secretary General should only act as a chief administrative officer and basically carry out what the big powers can agree on. It's increasingly difficult in this era. I think that the Secretary General should play a political role and be ready to engage with the big powers and the small powers and member states alike, because the challenges that we face in today's world are the challenges that cannot be addressed successfully without common approach and having everybody on board. It's perhaps more clearly so in the case of climate change and sustainable development. It's perhaps less clearly so in the case of peace and security. And there are lots of crises of peace and security that we face in today's world, but I believe that the Secretary General should be an agile and active player in all of these fields.
Igor, where do you stand on this? Compromise or confrontation?
Standing on?
On this issue of...
Yeah. Well, I mean, one's mettle can be only checked post festum. Of course, you take into account what everybody has been doing, different achievements, different results, but it's only through time you can say, well, this guy has really proven to be a good choice, or has been very, or too kind, or too humble, and so on and so on. I think that one can assert himself or herself only through being, or to trying to be very effective and very efficient. And I think from the day one, very early in the office, I think one has to, get on with, and dealing with very concrete matters. Try to assert himself as very, very assertive Secretary General. That's the only way forward. That's why I think we need to be able to, make very early moves. I concretely have proposed some reshuffle within the Chiefs of Executives, both for coordination or setting up of Office of Youth, or undertaking the effort to give a deep review of the budget structure, and so on and so on. I think by doing that, by showing your proactiveness, that's the only way to assert yourself and to be able to grow your authority. So in difficult times also, you are the one who people really listen. It cannot be the other way around, in my deep belief, because today, everybody wants outcomes. Everyone wants tangible results. It's simply no go if you just go around and try to just talk and talk. But I like also what Antonio says in terms of lack of trust. I think I've been putting it like all too often, people tend to assume the other side's positions without really talking through those positions. And I think that's also the role of the Secretary General, to try to bridge it, to try to build trust, and to be very active and proactive and engaged from the day one to, assert himself as someone who is able to rebuild trust and the optimism related to the overall capacities
Can I add to this?
of the UN.
If you're brief, because I want to get to another question.
Because I also believe that it is very important to be able to say in advance what you're going to do with regard to some of the difficult questions. And this is one of the reasons why I put forward a platform together. If you study it, I'm sure you're going to come to a conclusion that not everything that I say in this platform is going to be to the liking of each and every P5. If I survive this vote, if I get elected, I'd be actually in a position to carry it out. That's why I think this increased transparency into this process, and I thank you and all of you guys for making it happen. That's why I think it's very important.
Okay, I'm going to go to another question now. I think we have Scott Limbrick in the audience. Am I looking the wrong way?
Yeah. Hi. Thanks
Hi,
for joining
Scott.
us. My question is, what do you see as the greatest global threat over the next decade or so, and what role can the UN play in mitigating this risk? And then this was slightly touched on just now, but how might your approach on this issue differ from others?
So what do you see as the greatest global threat for the next 10 years, and how might your approach be different from the other candidates in tackling it? Do you want to?
Well, for me, the most dramatic threat we are facing today is the lack of capacity of the international community to prevent conflicts and to timely solve them, and the fact that we are witnessing a multiplication of new conflicts and the old conflicts seem never to die. And the fact that those conflicts are becoming more and more interconnected. If you go and see Nigeria, and then Mali, and then Libya, and then Somalia, and Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Afghanistan, all these conflicts are getting more and more interconnected, more and more difficult to solve, and more linked to the new threats of global terrorism. Now, I think the biggest challenge we face is the capacity to bring together those that can have an influence on the parties to the different conflicts, and to make sure that enough pressure is put on those actors in order to be able to address the root causes of these conflicts, and to create a situation in which we can start to effectively prevent things, and we can start to effectively address the conflicts taking place. But prevention is not just a diplomatic thing, and that is where everything is interconnected. Prevention is about development. Prevention is about human rights. Prevention is about fragility and addressing the fragility of states in many parts of the world. And it is this capacity to see things together and to act in the different fronts at the same time with coherent strategies that has been lacking. The UN has been too fragmented, dealing with different things in different ways and not being able to connect the dots. That capacity to act as one UN, but not as a slogan, as an effectively capacity to look at things together and to address them in a combined and coherent way is what has been lacking and what, in my opinion, needs to be done. On the other hand, if I may, just about trust, and coming back to the other question, my first wife that passed away long ago was a psychoanalyst, and she taught me something that has been extremely useful in all my political activities in my life. When two people are together, they are not two, they are six. What each one is, what each one thinks he or she is, and what each one thinks the other is. And this that is true for people is also true for countries and for organizations. And one of the roles of the Secretary General when dealing with the different members of the Security Council or the different key actors in each scenario is to make sure that we bring these six into two. That this misunderstanding disappears, that the false perceptions disappear. Perceptions are essential in politics. And that people are able to finally overcome their differences and be aware of their dramatically needed perception of a common interest.
Vuk, can I direct that question to you? What the biggest challenge in the next 10 years, and what will you do that's different? How is your approach different from others?
Well, I would say that there are two of them. One is of a more strategic nature, and that is climate change. So perhaps we're not going to see dramatic effects in the next 10 years, but if we fail to do things in the next 10 years, I think it might very well become too late to address this issue successfully. And then we will have left our inheritors a world that is on the verge of non-sustainability from a planetary and environmental perspective. So I think a decisive action needs to take place on the follow-up front to the Paris Climate Agreement. Paris Climate Agreement was one of the great diplomatic breakthroughs of 2015, and everybody feels so happy and so energetic that the fate of Paris wasn't the one of Denmark, the one of Copenhagen a few years ago, but that piece of paper will mean close to nothing if there is no adequate follow-up, if the commitments that were made in Paris are actually not followed through. And there are few organizations that are going to be in a position to do that, and there are going to be few people better positioned than the next Secretary General to actually be a very strong advocate for a serious follow-through and sticking to the commitments that various countries, all 193 of them, made in Paris by signing the COP21. And the second one is going to be the issue of peace and security. We live in the continent that is starting to feel the brunt of what other parts of the world were unfortunate to start feeling in a much more dramatic way a few years ago. There is an escalation of hostilities. There is dramatic humanitarian disaster as a result of these hostilities. The United Nations has played a very successful role in maintaining and helping keep international peace and security in the 20th century. It is poorly equipped to do so in the 21st century the way it is structured now. And that's why I propose, in a very concrete way, a new deal for peace operations of the United Nations in the 21st century. We got to start it now. We got to be quick, and within the next 5 years, this new generation of peace stabilization missions, especially having in mind the Middle East and the North Africa region, have to be in place and at the disposal of the member states and the Security Council to be deployed wherever and whenever necessary.
Okay, thanks very much, Vuk. Igor, what do you see as the big challenge of the next 10 years?
I think a big challenge is a potential lack of development. Because I think it is only through development we eventually reduce peace and security costs and humanitarian costs. It is only through development, and I think there are certain factors that may hinder that. Additionally, I'm not sure that, I'm increasingly worried that this side is not able to follow us. So I'm also, I think one of the problems and my concerns is also that the world is unable to handle globalization. I think also that some of the manifestations of even radicalism, violent extremism or terrorism and so on, in my view, are to a certain extent also due to resistance to globalization. So I'm not sure that the world is really able to handle all the changes, what new third or fourth industrial revolution brings and all those sort of changes. Plus, I'm quite concerned, to be frank with you, that there's a big danger of the series of pandemics. I mentioned demographic changes and the fact that world will continue to grow and world population will continue to grow. So it by default increases also risks for all of that. So that is why I really believe that this is different times and it requires a different approach of the United Nations. That is exactly why I believe the formula is through extended partnerships and better coordination. And it's should not be only UN, because UN cannot and should not do everything, but UN should be, at the helm, should be in the center to mobilize and coordinate, because there's regional arrangements, there's also private sector, there's many other donors, and we need to be able to work together. I've seen and heard a lot of examples of how we duplicate, how we are inefficient and ineffective eventually in many fields, in many projects and many programs we do. Just an example, I've seen the research which shows that, in average, 20% of the humanitarian money is wasted through either fraud or siphoned off through corruption or just inefficiency, duplication, and we also need to work out that. And I think it is our role to be able to embrace the new knowledge and changes. I mean, look at the capacities of the blockchain, for example. I think that has to be used as an opportunity to make sure that humanitarian assistance is better coordinated, and also to use those capacities to make sure that that a certain portion of it also goes for development. And these are, new approaches that we need to be able to respond to, ever-changing world, to all these dangers we may face through lack of development, through potential pandemics, through inability to handle globalization and the new industrial revolution, which may further polarize, developed world from undeveloped world or developing world.
I'm going to have to stop you there. Thanks very much, Igor. I just want to change things up slightly because, as Natalie said, we conducted a poll where we asked, via Global Citizen, we asked for questions from around the world, and we got more than 35,000 of them. So I'm just going to go through them one by one, if that's all right. I know climate change has come up, but the thing that a lot of people were agreed was that the climate change in general and the Paris Agreement in particular is really crucial, and they want to know, what will you do to make sure this agreement's actually implemented? Maybe, Igor, you could pick straight up on that.
No, absolutely. I think it is really very, very relevant, and I think it should be UN's role to, first of all, actively promote climate accord. It was signed recently. It was an incredibly big event. But at the same time, now we need to make sure it is ratified so that it becomes effective. But in the meantime, I think UN should work a great deal of it to make sure that we will keep pace with the implementation of the climate accord. The one that was agreed in Paris is very ambitious, very ambitious. But I think it also should make us feel very responsible and better organized to make sure that we are able to deliver. So I think UN should be sort of in the front. It should be in the center of that global coordinating process. And I think that the new generation of UN development assistance frameworks should be, of course, tailor-made, because in different parts of the world there's different climate change challenges. For Central Asia, it's the matter of water. For small highland economies, it's a matter of sheer existence, and so on. Some other places it's drought and so on. So I think we need to be able to, again, use, vast experience. Development assistance framework should be used to reflect the needs of those regions to better understand and better respond to climate change and sustainable development goals, but also should be very effective and credible tool to make sure that other donors' money is also used properly. When you compare the budgets of some specialized agencies and what lies there, a field also used by private sector, it's an incredible opportunity, and I'm not sure that we have managed to really bring that all together.
Okay, I'm going to go to a different question. Vuk, maybe you could take this one on. A lot of people were asking about peacekeepers who've had a kind of checkered record through sort of 50, 60 years with some notable successes, but also some fairly glaring failures. Now, I know in your manifesto there's some fairly tough language about how you would toughen up UN peacekeepers and make them a much more professional outfit. Do you not feel that's slightly dangerous when it comes to maintaining UN impartiality?
Well, I believe that the nature of challenges to peace and security that we have in the 21st century, and especially in certain parts of the world, like the Middle East and North Africa, are such that your current peacekeeping system, framework, rules, mentality, it's simply not adequate to address it. Today we have ISIS. Today we have other forms of violent extremism. Today we have cyber as a very new but very dangerous and lethal potential direction from which threats to peace and security can occur. But I'll answer the peace operations question, because this is probably one of the more, I'd say, eyebrows-raising, like raising eyebrows part of the platform. I do propose peace stabilization operations, a new generation of UN peacekeeping missions that would have much more robust rules of engagement, much better logistics and combat equipment, sea and air support if necessary, intelligence support by the international community, and very strong political civilian component that would accompany it. They would be able not only to protect themselves and defend themselves like they can sometimes do today, but actually able to protect those who they are sent over there to protect in the first place. I think we need to toughen it up. This, of course, would have to be a very careful negotiation with troop-contributing countries and with the Security Council, of course, in particular. But I think that if we go on in the 21st century with our old 20th century blue helmets, peacekeeping, that's going to become much more of a museum exercise than anything else.
Antonio, do you agree?
Well, I think that we have a basic flaw in this. In my opinion, there is a peace continuum: prevention, conflict resolution, peacekeeping, peace building, long-term development. And the way the UN is dealing with this is fragmented, item by item, and more 70% of the resources are in peacekeeping, and in many situations, as it was said, in places where there is no peace to keep, with mandates that are totally not adjusted to the situations we have. I think we need a comprehensive approach to this, and we need a coordinated approach to this. There was a very interesting suggestion coming from you, and we need to put the emphasis on prevention. Prevention is the forgotten area of the UN action, and prevention is the most important thing to be done, because prevention is what avoids suffering, what avoids problems. And of course the problem is that TV cameras are not there where a conflict is prevented. They are there when a crisis erupts. But it's absolutely essential to have a kind of a mental revolution on these and a total change in global advocacy to put all the emphasis on prevention. And then we strongly need to adjust the peacekeeping mandates and to adapt them to realities in order to make sure that peace is indeed kept. But I would say here another thing that I consider very important. We need to make sure that those situations in which peacekeepers become violators of human rights stop. And this is a question that needs to mobilize at the highest level the Secretary General and the heads of state and government of the countries involved. And at the same time to create a new dynamical relation between troop contributors and financial contributors. I would like to see more troops on the ground coming from the countries that are usually financial contributors. I think it's important that the so-called Western countries contribute more to peacekeeping operations.
But is that not problematic to put Americans and British troops into parts of the world where they're historically not popular?
I remember the British troops in Sierra Leone in the past. It was an extremely important operation. Sierra Leone today is a showcase of a transfer into democracy, of an evolution into democracy. I don't think it is fair to say there are a number of countries that will do the peacekeeping and we pay for it. No, I think it's important that all are involved in peacekeeping, and it's important to allow those countries that are the biggest troop contributors to have much more resources to do so properly. Just to give an example, not of a UN, of an African Union operation in Somalia. I was there in Mogadishu 3 times with the African Union troops. I can tell you, they have no night Googles, no helicopters, and their equipment reminded me of the Portuguese army, and you can imagine the Portuguese army is not a fantastic one. It's not exactly a big power. The Portuguese army of 30 years before. I mean, the international community needs to support those troops, to give them, with trilateral cooperation, much more effective capacity to solve the problems on the ground, and at the same time to increase the demanding requests we have for them to fully respect human rights of the populations they are supposed to protect. This new balance needs to be established, because I must say the worst thing for me as a UN officer, and I was a UN officer for 10 years, was to be aware of the fact that in some of the situations I was working with, violations of human rights were perpetrated not by armies or by different militias, but by peacekeepers themselves.
Okay, we're going to leave that there. Got an audience question now on a very different subject from Mafalda Damaso.
Yes. Good evening. Is it working? Yes. This is my question. When discussing who the next Secretary General should be, one increasingly hears that the position should be given to a woman. And yet, some people would argue that, more importantly than electing a woman to the role of Secretary General, one should elect a feminist. Do you consider yourself a feminist?
She's saying it shouldn't just be a woman, it should be someone who's a feminist. Do you consider yourself a feminist?
Vuk, are you a feminist?
Well, there's a short answer and a long answer to this. And
I think we might need the short answer.
And the short answer is yes. And I'll give you a long answer. I believe that 20 years after Beijing Declaration, that actually set the goal for the year 2000 to set a full gender parity in the UN, and that's 15 years ago. That was 15 years ago. So I believe that this election for Secretary General has to be a turning point in history for the role of women in the United Nations. Now, one powerful symbolism that I believe may be an element of it is to elect a woman Secretary General. And if the member states agree on the best person to be the next Secretary General who is a woman, I think it would be very useful and a very powerful symbolism. But I think it needs to be much more than that in order to be a turning point for real. So I think that the issue of representation has to go all across and deep down in the organization. And therefore, I made a very public commitment to achieve 50-50 gender parity from day one in appointments of U.S. Undersecretary Generals. Right now, there are 88 of them, and 24% are women. Well, 88 Undersecretary Generals, if I get elected, out of those 88, 44 are going to be women, and that's what I intend to do on day one. Okay. But that's not where it ends, because I don't think it's only about representation, it's about quality of career opportunities. It's about comprehensive review of women in peace and security, and it's about the rights of women worldwide. So 11 out of 53 commitments that I lay out in my platform relate to the rights of women throughout the world, not just in the UN. And therefore, going back to the beginning and to my short answer, yes, I do think I'm a feminist.
Okay, thanks. Igor, are you a feminist?
Well, I'll give you an example. Huh? If when I was...
that sounds like a no.
No, wait. I'll ask rhetorically.
Okay.
When I was Prime Minister, I was the first in the region to appoint female defense minister. Does that qualify me a feminist? If answer is yes, then thank you.
He comes from Montenegro, and I can tell you that the answer to that is yes.
And also what I propose, obviously, as we are all standing for this high office, and we're all male, so eventually if some of us is selected, then definitely all of us want to pursue the goal of making it more gender, equitable and attaining more gender parity. So I've been very, very clear that if I'm selected Secretary General, then Deputy Secretary General must be female. And also, I think that should be, leading by example. And as Vuk says, already from the first day in office, we should try to seize the opportunity of reshuffling under Secretary General by asking, countries who want to offer candidates and encourage more female and male candidates to be able to pick the best ones. I'm sure that there is a lot of skillful, talented, from all parts of the world, female candidates who could be excellent under Secretary General. And if we are talking about empowering women, if we talk about empowering young and so on, I think we need to be able to, lead by example and start, showing the case from the very beginning, from the senior management
What
team.
about the women around the world, amongst the 7 billion, not there at UN Plaza? What about ordinary women around the world? I mean, what is there in your platform to?
That's exactly what I'm trying to point to. It is not only about appointing Secretary General who is female, or Deputy Secretary General, or Under Secretary General. I think there has to be a pursuit of very consistent policies related to empowering women. We growingly talk and listen about the need to empower women, to make them also fill important positions, to engage them in dialogue. When you have women, taking part in peace processes, then peace reached gets more sustained, and there's clear examples for that. So I think it has to be, a very consistent global endeavor, which does not end with 1 or 2 appointments, and that is what should be made part of everybody's activity. I've also proposed that there should be, a new legally binding instrument that will eradicate violence against women. I've spoken to UN Women Leadership about this, and they agree with the need, with this idea. But I think their approach is also quite useful. They think that first of all, in short to mid-run, we need to show full commitment to already existing programs and instruments. And doing that, we'll be able to graduate into a stage where probably we'll be, working out a global legally binding instrument to prevent violence.
Antonio, do you have anything in your career hitherto that demonstrates your feminism?
I believe so.
Support for feminism.
I believe so. I have no doubt to say I'm a feminist. First, when I was elected party leader in Portugal in 91-92, I introduced mandatory quotas for women and men, for gender, in all bodies of the party and in all lists presented by the party to national bodies. And this was Southern Europe, early 90s. It's not today. I mean, Southern Europe, early 90s. The only party in my country, and probably the only party in most of the region. In UNHCR, we have reached parity at the Senior Management Committee, and there was parity in promotions and parity at the higher level. But I made a mistake, I have to confess. I thought it was enough to do it in the things that depended on my own decisions. And I thought that the organization then would do the same. It was not true. There are enormous resistances in the machine. And one of the things I believe, and there I think we are in agreement, is that at the UN level you need to have clear benchmarks and timeframes to reach parity at all levels. And you need to subject yourself to the evaluations of how these benchmarks and these timeframes are being met. But I would like to say that it's not only a question of parity, it's also a question of the way we do business in relation to the world. And here I think there are two essential shifts that need to be made. One is to consider that women and girls are not only a subject of protection, namely in peacekeeping or other, but that it's their empowerment that matters. The empowerment must be the priority. Of course, protection is essential, but protection is not enough. Empowerment is the key issue. And second aspect is we need to move from a focus on women and girls to gender mainstreaming in all policies and in all operations of the UN. If we do these things, I believe that we will be able to change, and I fully agree that one of the most embarrassing things for the UN today is not only the numbers you have quoted about USGs at top level, but the fact that things got worse in 2015. In 2015, 84% of the appointments to ASG and USG were of male elements, which means that we need really to make sure that this becomes a corporate priority and that everybody will be engaged in it.
I need to...
Can I ask you this?
If you're...
Because there are further examples of that, because the current metrics that exist in the UN, according to the YPS Resolution 1325, some of them are downright ridiculous. Measuring the progress in promoting women's rights and gender equality in general are, for example, how many times the word woman or women appears in UN resolutions. I mean, if that's going to be the metrics by which we are going to measure the progress on this issue, I mean, I don't think we're going in the right direction. So I think that one of the important priorities for the next Secretary General would be to task the UN system and probably put UN women in charge to lead this operation, is to develop a new set of measures and matrices by which we are going to be measuring the benchmarks that Antonio was mentioning. Because the way things are now, I mean, it's... I'm not surprised that we are not meeting the benchmarks.
Well, thanks very much. We've got another question, this time from the Danish ambassador to London, Klaus Gruber.
I'm here.
Hi.
Thank you. Well, you have all, the three of you, mentioned human rights as one of the three pillars of the UN as enshrined in the UN Charter. And the current Secretary General has launched the Human Rights Upfront initiative, which seeks to ensure the UN system takes early and effective action to prevent and respond to large-scale violations of human rights. How would you, as Secretary General, further promote the recognition of protection of human rights as a necessary condition for development and international peace?
Yeah. So how would you, as Secretary General, promote the recognition and protection of human rights as a necessary condition for the development of international peace? Do you want to take it on?
Well, we all recognize that there is no peace without development and development without peace. The truth is that there is no sustainable peace and no sustainable development without human rights being observed, without human rights being respected. And here I think that there is a very important initiative, the Human Rights Upfront initiative of the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, but it really needs an impulse to clarify what it means. And there are two aspects I would like to underline on these. First, the importance of making sure that in all UN departments and all UN agencies, human rights are embodied in their missions, in their strategies, and in their operations. And second, to make sure that there is effective training of their staff to make it happen. And then that they accept mechanisms of evaluation to see periodically the impact of their activities in the human rights situations in the countries where they operate. And the second aspect, which I think is very important, is the idea that we need to link better human rights to peace and security and to develop in the way we act as UN. And there are two or three things that can be done on this. First, the Secretary General has the right to seize the Security Council whenever the Secretary General believes that human rights violations are becoming a threat to peace and security. And this is something that has not been very much, I would say, in place. And this is an instrument which I believe the Secretary General can use.
Would you use that more?
Can use, and in my opinion, in some situations, must use. Second aspect that I would like to underline in relation to these is the fact that massive human rights violations are usually early warning in relation to threats to peace and security. And if the system is able, working with member states, to make sure that this is taken into account, I think we'll be much more effective in the prevention side. But there is another aspect that I believe is very important. Human rights violations come many times from the fragility of countries or the fragility of institutions or of civil societies. So one key aspect of the UN action must be to do everything possible to support the strengthening of states, the strengthening of institutions, and the strengthening of civil societies in order for the human rights approach to be more and more homegrown, as we witness that in many situations it's sometimes difficult for the international community to be effective in what it does.
Okay. Will you take this, but we're going to have to keep answers a bit shorter because we're starting to run out of time
Well, in short, if I get elected Secretary General, human rights is going to be front and center of my activity as Secretary General. I intend to be a strong human rights champion. As a young man, I fought for democracy and human rights in the street, and I risked my life fighting for democracy and human rights. But to be short and to be practical, and Secretary General, I put together some very concrete measures to this end in my platform. Actually, the only increase in the budget of the United Nations that I propose in my platform is the 50% increase in the funding of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. I mentioned that not everybody's going to like everything that is down in my platform, where I put it down in writing. Of course, I intend to work with the Fifth Committee and all the other stakeholders in making it happen. I also propose the creation of a task force on preventing genocide and other mass atrocities that I, as Secretary General, would chair monthly, and I propose the concrete composition of this. I don't want to talk about values in human rights. I think that none of us who are in this audience would disagree on the values aspect of human rights and how important they are and how much we are all prepared to fight for them. But in order to make the next UN administration more efficient and more human rights prone, I put down 11 concrete proposals. So how can we do it practically? They're all practical, and they're all there, and I very much hope that I'm going to be able to get your support for them.
Okay, I'm going to take another question, and then, Igor, you can come back in. Lord Hannay of Chiswick, I think, is in the audience.
Yes. I'd like to ask you a question about sexual violence in conflict, and in particular about the continuous trickle of cases in which UN peacekeepers and other peacekeepers are accused of sexual misconduct in peace operations, which is, I fear, a real blot on the United Nations and one which ought to be eliminated. I wonder if you could say how you will give priority to that if you were chosen to be Secretary General, and in particular whether you do not believe that in order to banish the whole issue of impunity for peacekeepers who commit these crimes, and not one, I think, has so far been brought to trial, it would not be better to have some kind of international jurisdiction in front of which they would be brought and tried in a proper, fair manner.
Okay, so the question is about whether there should be an international system for trying these people in a fair, extraterritorial way. But
well, I think that this is an excellent question, and I'd like to interconnect it with the one which relates to human rights. There's two sides of human rights issue or pillar that I see. One is, as it has already been said, easily human rights are violated, and it is usually a very early symptom of a crisis looming. So definitely we need to see Human Rights Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights more engaged and well represented, in terms that one of my proposals is we should think of setting up a so-called UN Peace Operations Group, because when you look at the resolution that was passed recently that deals with sustaining peace, it calls for the need that we all should understand that peace and security is responsibility of all of us. We can all contribute a little bit. So by working together. And therefore, I think that we need to have better coordination. It cannot be only about humanitarian assistance or peacekeeping or political affairs and so on. It should be also economic and social affairs. It is human rights and so on. Additionally, I believe that human rights actually permeate the whole 2030 agenda. That's why I want to see Human Rights High Commissioner co-chairing UN Sustainable Development Group along with UNDP Chief Administrator, to make sure that everything we do is actually also to meet cultural, economic, social rights worldwide. And that's why so this is, I think, a very important question, and we need to understand that this is really both short, mid, and long-term issue that we have to be very much focused on. And this brings me to this particular question. I fully agree with you, because I think that the story doesn't end with passing the resolution that will put shame and send away contingents. I think the guilt must be individualized. And therefore, I mean, I'm not a lawyer myself, but I would like to see some lawyers work to make sure that we have identified all the possibilities, or looked up for all the possibilities of setting up a special tribunal that can go after those perpetrators of terrible crimes. I don't think one can think of something more discrediting than a peacekeeper active in sexual abuse. This is something which is really shameful and terribly destroys UN's image. So I think it is one of the first tasks we need to and it's a moral task we need to get on with.
Antonio, should we have international courts to try peacekeepers who've done wrong?
I think we need to look into things how they should be and look into things how they might be able to be. Obviously, if we could have some kind of independent jurisdiction, it would be excellent. I'm not sure it will be easy to get there. And I think that the only way to get there is the new compact with all key parties, troop contributors, financial contributors, and to make sure that there is an adjustment in the relation between countries, the UN, and the support those that are contributing with troops receive in order to be able to do it much better. So this is the kind of thing which I believe we need to move. We need to have a lot of dialogue on this. We need to bring people together and to try to find common ground. What we need to make sure is that the present situation, in which there is a theoretical zero tolerance, but a not effectively zero tolerance on the ground, is overcome.
And Vuk, can I just bounce something onto you? Why do we have a system where we don't punish peacekeepers who've done wrong? We punish the whistleblowers who tell us what's been going on while we haven't been paying attention.
I actually think this is disastrous part of the reality. I think that unless we tackle decisively this sad part of UN reality, the UN credibility will have been irreversibly lost in a very short time period that is ahead of us. And this is why, and I hate to continue referring to my platform, but I'm very proud that I had put this out in writing. One of my priorities is going to be to protect whistleblowers, and I actually put forward a concrete measure as to how to protect them and shield them and make sure that the gratitude that they receive from actually blowing a whistle on such disastrous and appalling things like the ones you mentioned actually make sure that this issue is resolved and not that these people are kicked out.
Okay.
Protecting whistleblowers is very much not part of the UN culture today, and that will change on day one if I become Secretary General.
Be brief if you can, Antonio.
To punish whistleblowers that denounce serious violations of human rights is totally unacceptable and must completely stop.
Before we come to the final question, I wanted to, there was quite a few questions that we didn't get round to putting to you, and I'm sorry if you didn't get a chance to ask your question, but a lot of them group into the area of, has the UN been worth it? Is it too big? Does it try to do too much? It's grown from an organization with a budget of, I think it was 200 million in the 1940s to 40 billion today. It does so much on the ground that people argue local NGOs could do better. Have we grown this thing too much? Would you cut it back? Anyone want to answer?
I don't think it has grown too much. It probably would need to be bigger in budget, in capacity, but it also would need to be more effective. Right. So probably there is a lot of fat that needs to be cut, but there are basic things that we are still not able to do and should be able to increase it. I'll give you just one example of my past experience. In UNHCR, we were able in 10 years to move our headquarters costs from about 14% to 6.5%, and our staff costs from 41% to 22%. But we tripled our activity, and I would say we are still about half of what we should be able to do. So we need to have more resources, but we need to make sure that those resources are properly used.
Mm-hmm. Do either of you want to say, does it do too much?
Yeah, I already hinted that very early in the office, I believe Secretary General should set up an international panel of experts, something like we had last year on peace operations, which should be formed among experts, but rather outsiders than experts from the inside of the system, because I really think we need to take a close look with all due scrutiny to make sure that the budget is under adequate review. Because I'm not sure I agree with this point that UN's budget should be bigger. As I mentioned already, 15 years ago it was I'm referring only to the core budget. It was $2.5 billion. Now it's grown to $5.5 billion. And 74% of all those costs are personal costs. All sorts of wage bill. I'm not sure that this is something which is sustainable, and absolutely it will be unacceptable to all those who are to all those who are providers of money. There's 16 countries that provide 80% of the UN's budget, whereas there is, theoretically 120 or 30 countries with the provision of 1.3% altogether, which may have, a decisive say on the budget. So I think we need to strike a better balance between where we are and what we do. I'll give you an example. Talking to many people who come from small island economies or landlocked countries or least developed countries, they actually complain that some of their programs, like Samoa Pathway or Vienna landlocked or Istanbul least developed, are really not treated well. There's no mention of it in the core budget. So I think we need to reverse it. I think that we need to insist on program budgeting to make sure that all those vital documents are seen there and used as a lever to better mobilize funds which exist.
Thanks, Igor. Vuk, if you
very
be quick.
shortly, I'm the only guy here who had actually chaired the Fifth Committee and has gone through the anguish of chairing the Fifth Committee that deals with the budget allocation. So I think Igor would find it very, very hard as Secretary General to pull this particular idea through. But what I want to point your attention to is the fact that annual philanthropic giving of private corporations and foundations across the world is $75 billion annually, out of which in the last 10 years the United Nations has been able to attract less than $1 billion. So in the 10 years, $1 billion out of $75 billion annually, I think that is a dramatic failure to reach out to the private sector world, to the world of private donations and corporations. If I get elected, I actually would give that issue a priority and appoint a special envoy for philanthropic outreach, somebody with a very high stature, somebody with a very high recognition name. I'm not going to call names, but I do have a couple of guys in mind, a couple of guys, men or women in mind, that could do the job. But there has to be a tap into the world of private giving, much more efficient and effective than what the current UN administration has been able to achieve.
Okay, we have time for one last question from Jessica Richardson. I don't know where you are.
We are here. On behalf of Jessica, who is next to me, her question: as a young person, I would like to ask if there's any hope for future generations.
Is there any hope for future generations? Perhaps the three of you would like to use that question to make your kind of final grand denouement. Any hope for the future, Igor?
I think there has to be, there must be. And that is why I really try to put emphasis on the youth needs. That is why I've, from the day one of engaging into this whole campaign, I've been also talking to young people in attempt to identify their wishes, their interests, because it is about the future generations. I think I've already mentioned that 48% of the global population is under 25, and I think young people are particularly disillusioned or growingly disillusioned. So I think we need to take that seriously into account and make sure that we reach out, and that is why I want to set forward policies that will not only be statistics, We mentioned Beijing Declaration, we mentioned empowerment of women and so on, but it was Resolution 1325, and it took 1,000 more resolutions to deal with young people, and it's 2250. So I think it also shows that we are lagging behind. I think we have to understand it's about young people, as we need to be sort of in the front of reaching out and engaging with young people all around the world, with establishing UN network, young people networks, youth councils, and so on. Because bringing in young people, that's the only way to respond to violent extremism, terrorism, and so on. Because these are challenges of the modern world.
Your fellows won't get a chance to join in. Vuk, hope for the future?
Well, first of all, I'm so happy. This is the first election in which I'm running, and I'm not the youngest candidate. Igor is actually the youngest candidate in this race. But I do have hope for the future, and the reason why I have a hope is the fact that I truly believe in the capacity of human race to face even the toughest challenges. And I believe it is possible together that we make an impact on global governance in the way that it fulfills the aspirations and hopes of the real people in the 21st century. And I believe that at the heart of that endeavor has to be a rejuvenated, reformed, transparent, and accessible United Nations. But that's not the type of the United Nations that we have today. If you disagree, if you think that we're moving in the right direction and at the right speed, if you believe that the UN is just fine the way it is, that we need more of the same all things and same all faces, then I'm clearly not your candidate. But if you believe that we do need a substantial facelift for our common home, that is the UN, and if you believe that we must stop with the business as usual, well, here are the 53 things that I propose that we do together in order to make it possible, and I ask for your support in that.
And Antonio, are you hopeful?
In these last 10 years, working with refugees and seeing what it is to be a Syrian family that has seen their house destroyed, their friends being killed, moving in dramatic circumstances into Turkey, and then moving into a boat where they might perish because they have hope in their future and the future of their children. When I see their resilience, their courage, because they have hope, I think it's our duty not only to be hopeful, but also to make sure that their hope becomes a true thing.
Okay. So that brings us to the end of tonight's proceedings. Can I thank our three candidates for coming? Can I thank everyone for being such a fabulous audience in this great space? And can I wish you all a very safe journey home? Good night.